What if I told you some spirits never left their graves, and tonight they might be watching you? If you love ghost stories, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video so we can bring you even more terrifying tales. Subscribe, like, share to keep the ghosts coming. The wind through the mountains of Thermopylae does not move like ordinary air. It does not brush the olive trees gently, nor hum through the reeds, as it does in other valleys of Greece. Here, it moans a long, low, hollow sound that rises and falls like breathing through stone. And sometimes, if you stand still enough, it seems to shape itself into words. Mu Omicron Lambda, Nu Lambda Alpha Beta Y. It says, "Come and take them." The villagers of Lamia, not far from the ancient pass, know better than to linger there after sunset. They tell stories of lights on the cliffs, of footsteps that echo where no path remains, of an unseen figure standing on the ridge when the moon thins to a sliver. Tourists come, laugh, take photographs beside the bronze statue of King Leonidas, and leave by nightfall. But the locals lock their doors and keep candles burning. For them, the legend of Thermopylae is not history. It is a haunting. The ghost they fear is not cruel. It does not harm for pleasure or vengeance. Its presence is heavier, older, the kind of haunting that does not seek to frighten but to remind. They call it the lion's echo. Yet the legend begins long before the whisper of the wind. In the beginning, there was only the sea and the heat. Greece burned with prophecy in those days, omens in the smoke, the rustle of fate in the cypress groves. Sparta, proud and grim, was already a city of warriors long before Leonidas was born. Their children were tested in pain before they were taught to speak. To be Spartan was to surrender comfort to honor, warmth to endurance, mercy to silence. Leonidas, the third son of King Anaxandridas, was not expected to rule. He trained alongside ordinary boys, slept in the dirt, bled on the sand, and smiled through broken teeth. He learned early that fear was a sickness to be burned out by hardship. He spoke little, not from arrogance, but from focus. It was said that even as a boy, his gaze felt ancient, as if he already saw beyond the years granted to him. When fate placed the crown upon his head, he wore it like a shackle, not a prize. And when the Persian Empire darkened the horizon, sending its heralds demanding submission, Leonidas's only reply was the same two words that echo even now in ghost stories. Mu Omicron Lambda, Nu Lambda Alpha Beta Y. Come and take them. The battle that followed was not simply a war, it was a ritual of defiance. 300 Spartans, a handful of allies, and a narrow strip of land between mountain and sea became the altar where men offered their bodies to eternity. For 3 days and nights, the hot gates ran red with blood, and in that crimson mist, Leonidas found the immortality he never sought. When he fell, pierced by arrows, his men fought over his corpse. They refused to let the enemy touch him, but death took them all in the end, and the Persians, furious at their defiance, mutilated his body. They raised his head on a spear, not knowing that in doing so, they crowned him twice. That night, thunder rolled through the pass, though no storm came. Horses panicked. Soldiers saw figures moving in the mist, men without eyes, standing shoulder to shoulder, shields raised in silence, and among them, the tall shadow of a king, his spear burning like a line of fire. The first haunting began there. Centuries later, long after Sparta had turned to dust and empire to memory, the land remained uneasy. Shepherds who grazed their flocks in the hills above the pass sometimes heard the clatter of armor at dawn. Travelers swore that their fires flickered blue and cold, as if touched by another world. One priest from Thessaly recorded in 480 AD that he found the soil near Thermopylae warm to the touch, as if blood still moved beneath it. Time did not erase the fear, it changed it by the time of the Ottoman occupation. Locals told of a spirit that walked the mountain roads, a soldier wrapped in rags of crimson. He carried no weapon, yet the ground shook faintly beneath his steps. A Turkish patrol once disappeared after mocking the statue of the Spartan king. Their horses returned days later, riderless and trembling, their eyes white with panic. Old stories spread that Leonidas's ghost did not rest, because he was not buried with peace but with pride. He fought not to win, but to prove that courage could outlive flesh. Such a thing, once invoked, could not die. It lingered in the stones, the air, the heartbeat of the land. And yet, centuries are cruel to ghosts. They fade, their echoes grow thin, trapped beneath the noise of modernity. By the 20th century, Thermopylae became a place of photographs and postcards, The story of the 300 was taught in classrooms, stripped of its mystery. The world forgot that legends bleed, until the night the wind returned. It began quietly, in late autumn. The valley was empty, save for a small archaeological expedition led by Dr. Elias Mounos, a Greek historian obsessed with Leonidas. He believed there were still undiscovered burial sites beneath a modern monument, perhaps the true resting place of the fallen Spartans. He brought a small team, a geophysicist, a photographer, and a graduate student named Nadia, whose fascination with ancient myths bordered on reverence. Their camp was set up not far from the thermal springs that gave the pass its name. The air was heavy with salt and sulfur, the smell of something ancient trying to breathe through the soil. The first night was uneventful. The second was not. Nadia woke to the sound of footsteps outside her tent, slow, deliberate, and metallic. She thought it was Elias checking the equipment, but when she looked out, there was no one. The night was still, but the air shimmered faintly, like heat rising from sand. Then came the faintest murmur, not words, just rhythm, the pattern of marching. By morning, she convinced herself it was a dream, but when the geophysicist examined the ground near the monument, his scanner showed something impossible. Rows upon rows of shapes buried deep in the rock, perfectly aligned, as if an army still stood beneath the surface. Metallic density, he murmured. It's like they never left. They unearthed nothing tangible. No bones, no bronze. Yet the nights grew colder. The sound came again. Boots, faint voices, and the strange heartbeat-like pulse of something vast beneath the earth. Elias became consumed. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping. He claimed he heard whispers in Doric Greek, old, archaic, a dialect even scholars barely recognized. The words were always the same. Lambda epsilon, omega, nu y delta alpha sigma beta alpha sigma iota, lambda epsilon y sigma. King Leonidas. On the fifth night, the wind rose suddenly. Their tents shuddered. The sulfur pools boiled though no heat source touched them. Nadia saw shadows moving along the cliffs, tall figures with spears. When she blinked, they were gone, but the air smelled of iron. The next morning, Elias was missing. Only his notebook remained, open on the ground beside the monument. His last entry read, "He is not dead. He stands guard still." And he calls. The search for Elias continued for days, but no trace was found. Authorities closed the site, citing a sinkhole near the cliffs. The case faded from public attention, lost among bureaucratic reports and weathered headlines. But Nadia never forgot the sound of that wind, the whisper that seemed to breathe through her name. She began to dream of him, not Elias, but Leonidas. The image came in fragments. A man with a torn cloak, eyes glowing faintly like embers, standing knee-deep in shadow. Behind him, 1,000 figures rose like mist. Each time she woke, her pillow was wet with seawater, and always, in the silence before dawn, came the same phrase, not spoken aloud but pressed into her mind. "You still kneel to Isaiah." The ghost had returned, not as vengeance, but as question. Was courage something that could die, or something that haunted the weak? As the months passed, strange phenomena spread. Cameras malfunctioned near the monument. Locals reported hearing drums at night. A shepherd found his flock dead and lined neatly along the hillside, as if laid to rest in formation. No wounds, no blood, just silence. The Orthodox priest from the nearby village visited the site to bless it. He brought holy water and incense. When he began to pray, the wind rose, scattering the ashes. His candle flickered blue. He stopped mid-verse and whispered, "He does not want peace. He wants remembrance." That evening, the priest packed his belongings and left the village forever. And so the haunting deepened, not a ghost bound by hatred, but by duty. Leonidas' spirit had lingered through time, growing thinner, colder, until the modern world's apathy called him back. In every age of comfort, he rose to remind men of what was once unyielding. He was not the ghost of a man. He was the ghost of an idea, and ideas, once they begin to haunt, never leave.
The mountains watched in silence. They had always been silent, but silence like a wound, confessed. After Dr. Elias Morenos vanished, Thermopylae slept again for a season. If sleep can be said of stone that remembers, tourists returned, unaware, that beneath their feet lay the residue of a man's lost breath, and the murmurs of something older than history. Only one among them carried the weight of that memory. Nadia the young researcher who had watched the mist form the shape of a man in armor and had never again slept without the faint taste of iron in her mouth. Months had passed, but the dreams did not stop. Every night she walked the same valley, dry, moonlit, and filled with the rhythm of marching feet. She was always alone at first, her footsteps echoing on the salt-soaked earth. Then came the noise, the clash of metal, the battle cry swelling into the air, and that voice, deep, guttural, commanding, whispering mole and lab. Each time, the voice drew closer. Each time, she woke before it reached her dot. Her therapist called it traumatic hallucination. Her friends called it obsession, but Nadia called it by another name. Summoning Dot. By late winter she returned to the valley. She told no one, no colleagues, no journalists, not even her family. She rented a small room in the nearby village of Thermopylae, where the sulfur smell of the springs clung to everything, even the bedsheets. The innkeeper, an old woman named Katerina, watched her unpack with the calm of someone who had seen many travelers and buried most of their stories. "You're not the first to come back here," Katerina said, setting a candle on the table. "But you might be the last." "What do you mean?" "The mountain keeps what it's owed." When the candle flickered, Nadia noticed something strange. The flame bent not toward the drafty window but toward the direction of the pass, as if drawn by breath. On the second night, she walked alone to the monument. The bronze statue of Leonidas loomed above her, torchlight glinting across the metal muscles, the sculpted shield catching the moon like a mirror. His face was fixed in that expression, not anger, not pride, but something more terrifying, calm defiance. Nadia placed her hand against the pedestal. The metal was warm, not sun-warm, not residual heat. It pulsed faintly, like the memory of a heartbeat. "You're not gone," she whispered. "You're waiting." The wind answered, not as words, but as vibration, a murmur that passed through her bones. The ground trembled ever so slightly beneath her. She looked around. No one, no movement. But then she noticed the grass along the roadside, pressed flat in perfect lines, as if an invisible formation stood at attention. She began recording on her phone, whispering notes, but the recording glitched static, bursts of sound like metallic breathing. She played it back later at the inn, amplifying it on her laptop. Between the static came a rhythm. 2 beats, pause. 3 beats, pause. Repeated like marching cadence. At minute 147, a voice whispered something low and distant. She played it again, louder, slower. The voice said, unmistakably, "Return the king." The following day she visited the Archaeological Bureau in Athens to retrieve Elias's old research files. The archivist, a thin man with nicotine-stained fingers, seemed nervous when she mentioned his name. "Marinos," he muttered. He didn't file anything, just a box of nonsense. He returned a cardboard container sealed with government tape. Inside lay fragments of maps, burned photographs, and pages of Greek text written in ink that looked too dark, too wet, as if it had never dried. The first page bore a strange sigil, a circle with 3 points, resembling both a shield and an eye. Beneath it, Elias had written, "Thermopylae was never just a battlefield. It was a door." In later notes, his handwriting deteriorated into frantic lines. One passage read, "They stand in formation beneath the stone. They do not decay. The sulfur preserves them. They wait for his command." Another, "The ghost does not haunt us. We haunt him. Our weakness keeps him bound." Nadia closed the box, trembling. The words felt less like madness and more like truth forgotten by time. That night, she dreamt again, only this time, she did not wake Dot. In her vision, she stood within the pass as storm clouds swirled overhead. The earth beneath her feet was slick with blood, yet the air was silent. Then the mist parted, and from it emerged a figure tall, cloaked in red torn 2 ribbons. His eyes were not eyes at all, but molten light, like the glow of coals deep within a forge. His skin shimmered faintly, shifting between bronze and shadow. Leonidas. He did not speak. Instead, he reached out and placed a hand upon her shoulder. Heavy, cold, eternal. The moment he touched her, the world around them shifted. She saw flashes, men fighting, shouting, dying in fire. Spears splintered, arrows fell like rain. A mountain of corpses rose before her, and at its peak stood the king, wounded but unbent, his mouth curved in defiance. "You cannot conquer the dead," he said, his voice echoing like thunder. "You can only join them." Then she saw herself standing beside him, armor glinting, her modern clothes gone, replaced by bronze and leather. The sound of marching filled her ears again, louder, faster, until it consumed everything. When she awoke, her bedsheet was soaked, not with sweat but with fine dust, reddish, metallic, blood rust. The scent of iron clung to her hands. Days blurred into nights. The haunting no longer stayed in her dreams. She began hearing voices in the sulphur wind, sometimes chanting, sometimes whispering commands. At dusk, shadows gathered on the ridges. She recorded video, but every time she replayed it, the images distorted faces forming from the mist, lines of soldiers marching through the haze. Once, a flash of movement passed close to the camera, a spear tip gleaming in the dark. Her rational mind crumbled under the weight of what she saw, but another part of her, older, primal, felt recognition. It was as if something deep within her remembered this place. And then came the vision of the door. Elias had written of it a gateway beneath the sulphur springs, marked by the same sigil from his notes. Nadia followed his maps, trekking alone through the cracked basin until she found it, a circular stone embedded in the earth, etched with the faint outline of the sigil. The air above it shimmered, distorting light like heat haze, though the night was freezing. She placed a hand upon the stone. A pulse answered, faint but undeniable, like a heartbeat buried in rock dot. Then came the whisper, "Leonidas waits." The phenomena spread beyond her. The villagers began to complain of nightmares. Livestock refused to cross the valley road. Electronics malfunctioned. The air itself felt charged, as though the ancient dead stirred beneath the soil. Katerina, the innkeeper, grew pale and sickly. One morning, Nadia found her whispering prayers before the window. When asked what was wrong, the old woman's eyes filled with tears. "He came to me," she said, "the king. He stood at the foot of my bed. His cloak was red as sunset. He asked why we had forgotten." 2 nights later, Katerina was gone, her bed empty, the window open. The candle burned to waxless glass. Only footprints remained in the dust, bare, yet deep, as though pressed by someone far heavier than human. Nadia realized the haunting had wakened fully, no longer confined to dreams or isolated sightings. It was expanding, feeding on attention, on belief. The ghost of Leonidas was not a spirit of decay, but of endurance. The more she sought him, the more real he became. The stronger her fear, the stronger his form. She began hearing a rhythm in her heartbeat that did not match her pulse. 2 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause, the cadence of Spartan drill. She tried to ignore it, until she realized the pattern echoed exactly with the sound she had recorded weeks before. At dawn one morning, she climbed the hill behind the monument. The air shimmered, again, thick with heat, though frost covered the ground. And then she saw them, shapes in the mist, forming a line across the ridge. 300 silhouettes, each holding a shield. Their faces were blank, features lost to time, but their posture was perfect. Unyielding, at their center, stood the king. He turned toward her, slowly, deliberately, and though his face was a ruin of smoke and flame, she could feel his gaze pierce her like a spear. "You still kneel to Isley," he said again, his voice no longer inside her mind but spoken aloud, vibrating the air itself. The soldiers raised their shields as one. The sound shook the valley, then silence. She blinked, and they were gone, but the ground where they stood was no longer barren. It was scorched, marked with faint footprints burned into the earth. From that moment, Thermopylae became unstable. Locals reported sudden tremors. Radio signals flickered with interference. Pilgrims began to arrive, drawn by rumors of miracles, lights in the night sky, disembodied chants. Some claimed to see the ghost of the king blessing those who knelt at his statue. Others said he struck them down with visions so terrible they fled screaming into the dark. The Greek government dispatched researchers, theologians, even military units to cordon off the area. Yet equipment malfunctioned. Communication broke. The entire valley seemed to resist intrusion. And in the center of it all, Nadia waited, not as an observer but as witness. She had come to Thermopylae seeking history. What she found was resurrection. The ghost had fully awakened, and it was not alone. Night fell upon Sparta like a black shroud soaked in the blood of old wars. The streets that had once echoed with the clash of bronze and the chants of warriors now whispered with things, unseen voices that were neither alive nor dead. The statue of Leonidas, standing at the city's heart, had begun to sweat, again drops of moisture running down its marble cheeks like tears. Priests who approached it spoke of visions, of ancient helmets rising from the river Eurotas, of phantom hoplites marching in the fog. It began subtly, as hauntings always do, first in dreams, then in sounds, then in the touch of air itself. But the dreams came to one man most vividly, Nicandros, the last descendant of Leonidas. Though the blood had thinned across centuries, he was a historian, not a soldier, and his nights had turned into rituals of torment. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his ancestor half-man, half-wraith emerging from the mist of Thermopylae. Leonidas would not speak. His mouth opened only to exhale ash. Behind him stretched 1,000 shadows, the spirits of his 300, their spears impaling the void. Nicandros began to believe that Sparta itself was cracking open its soil, giving birth to something that should have remained in legend. He felt it in the walls of his home, which hummed at midnight with the sound of marching feet. His dog refused to enter his study. Candles would extinguish themselves whenever he tried to read the old texts about the king's death. And then came the cold, a cold so deep it froze thought itself, a cold that whispered, "Return." The curse was not upon a man, it was upon time itself. One night, as lightning struck the Tagetas peaks, Nicandros felt an invisible force pulling him toward the ruins of Thermopylae. The same wind that had once carried the screams of dying Persians now seemed to carry his name. He followed it without resistance. There are moments when history summons you, when your will is no longer your own. When he arrived at the pass, the narrow throat between mountains and sea fog lay thick as a burial cloth. The smell of iron filled the air. Beneath the soil, he could feel something breathing. And then, from within that vapor, they came. Spectral soldiers, helmeted, hollow-eyed, transparent, yet solid in their grief, marched in formation. Each carried a broken spear. Each bore the wound of his death. But their eyes were fixed on one figure who stood apart, towering, his bronze armor blackened with soot. King Leonidas. He looked nothing like the statue. His spirit was both majestic and ruined, like a temple half-standing after an earthquake. The crimson cloak of a Spartan king dragged behind him, though no wind stirred. "Why do you haunt this place?" Nicandros whispered. Leonidas did not answer. His gaze was fixed beyond the mortal world, toward something older. But then, with a voice that sounded like a sword being unsheathed after centuries, he spoke not in Greek, but in the language of the dead. The words came like smoke, entering Nicandros' lungs, forcing him to hear their meaning. "We were promised remembrance. We were promised eternity, but memory is a battlefield that fades." As he spoke, the ghosts of the 300 lifted their spears toward the heavens. Lightning split the fog, and in that flash Nicandros saw them as they once were: flesh, blood, sweat, raw. Then, just as quickly, they were corpses again, staring into eternity. The veil between life and death thinned until it was a single heartbeat. Nicandros felt his ancestors' rage. The world had betrayed them. Sparta had turned to dust, its glory reduced to ruins and tourist cameras. The king's ghost was not proud. It was hungry. It sought atonement, or perhaps revenge. The ground beneath Thermopylae began to tremble. Nicandros fell to his knees. Around him, the fog turned red, as if the sky were bleeding. The ghostly army circled him in silence, the ring tightening. He realized then what they wanted: living blood, to anchor their memory. The line of Leonidas must pay the debt of forgetfulness. Leonidas approached him slowly, his spectral hand gripping an invisible sword. Nicandros could see the scars across his ancestor's chest, the same wounds described in ancient accounts. When the ghost raised the blade, the air screamed. "Do you fear death?" Leonidas asked. Nicandros could not answer. He felt the weight of history pressing down on him, the burden of all who had died, believing that valor would outlive flesh. The sword descended, but instead of pain, Nicandros felt fire liquid, golden fire coursing through his veins. He screamed as visions poured into him. The stand at Thermopylae, the burning of the pass, the endless slaughter. He was Leonidas now, or rather, Leonidas was inside him. The ghosts roared in triumph, their voices blending into a single chant that shook the mountains. "Molen la Beckham, and take them." The ancient war cry echoed through centuries, resurrected by the dead, and then silence. When Nicandros awoke, he was lying at the base of the monument that marks the site of the last stand. His clothes were soaked with dew, but in his hand was something impossible. a shard of bronze, old as the battle itself, glowing faintly red. From that night onward, Thermopylae became different. Travelers reported strange mists, even on clear days. Soldiers visiting the memorial heard footsteps following them when no one was there, and the locals began to whisper that the king had returned not as a savior, but as a restless spirit demanding remembrance. Nicandros changed too. His eyes darkened. He began to speak in old Doric phrases no modern Greek remembered. In his sleep, he would mutter orders to invisible troops. Sometimes, at midnight, he was seen standing on the hill, whispering to the wind as though counting his dead. Unspartled, quiet Sparta began to wake. Earthquakes trembled beneath the ruins. The Eurotas ran red with clay, as if stained by blood. Archaeologists unearthed helmets with fresh dents, as if struck in recent battle. A curse or a resurrection was unfolding. The past was no longer content to stay buried. When Nicandros looked into the mirror one night, he did not see his own reflection. He saw Leonidas' eyes burning like coals, lips curved in a warrior's half-smile. "We never died," the ghost whispered through him. "We are merely waiting." And as the moonlight poured over the hills, the ghosts of Sparta began to march again through time, through myth, through the veil of mortality itself. The dead were reclaiming their story. The night of the Thermopylae spirits had begun.
Dawn came late to Sparta. It was not that the sun forgot to rise, it was that its light seemed reluctant to fall upon the valley where death had begun to speak again. The river Eurotas flowed heavy with mist, and every breath that escaped its banks seemed to whisper names. Denix, Alpheus, Leonidas. They were not echoes of history. They were the murmurs of something breathing beneath the centuries. Nicandros had not left his home in weeks. His journal was filled with fragments of dreams that did not belong to him. His handwriting had changed, sharper, older, resembling the inscriptions carved into stone tablets unearthed from the ruins of the old Agoj. The townspeople had started calling him the Returning One, for wherever he walked, dogs whimpered and torches flickered blue. He ate little, he slept less. His voice carried the cadence of a long-dead king. There were nights when the winds from Tagitas howled like a chorus of lamenting women. On such nights, Nicandros would stand on his balcony overlooking the ancient hills and whisper, "We are not done." And the hills would whisper back. Reports began to spread. Hikers claimed to see men in bronze armor patrolling the mountain ridges under moonlight. Tourists at Thermopylae found their photographs blurred, the shadows of hoplites appearing behind them where no one had stood. Archaeologists heard shields clashing deep within the soil during their digs, but none of them could explain the strangest event. The night the statue of Leonidas, standing outside the ancient ruins, moved. It began with a sound, a faint grinding of marble on marble. Witnesses said they saw the statue's eyes flare with red light. One woman swore she saw its hand twitch, fingers tightening around the invisible spear it held. The next morning, the monument was found turned slightly toward the north, toward the pass of Thermopylae. When Nicandros heard this, he smiled. He began to write feverishly, claiming he was translating the language of ghosts. His manuscripts described the dead Spartan warriors trapped between worlds, unable to cross into Elysium because the memory of their sacrifice had been reduced to myth, their glory to a tourist slogan. They were promised immortality through remembrance, he wrote. But mankind's memory is fragile. Oblivion is the true enemy, and I, their blood, must fight it. Then, one night, he vanished. His neighbors heard a sound like a trumpet blast at midnight, followed by a wind that smelled of salt and bronze. The next morning, his door was open, his papers scattered, and the room icy cold, though it was summer. On the wall above his desk was carved with something sharp, ancient, deliberate, a single phrase in Doric Greek: Mu, Omicron Lambda Nu, Lambda Alpha Beta Y. Come and take them. No one ever saw Nicandros again, but the haunting did not end there. Months later, a team of researchers visiting the Thermopylae battlefield discovered something that should not have existed. Footprints pressed into the clay near the Leonidas monument. The prints were barefoot, large, and arranged in formation, as though a phalanx had stood there recently. And on the nearby hill where the ancient dead were buried, the earth had shifted. The soil bulged, cracked, and revealed fragments of bronze armor polished by no hand. A helmet, unmistakably Spartan, rested atop the mound, glimmering faintly under a moon that seemed far too bright. One archaeologist, a woman named Dr. Helena Koronios, took the helmet into her tent for examination. That night, she dreamed of fire, she saw Leonidas standing before her, not as a phantom but as something between flesh and light. His face was calm, his eyes fierce. Behind him stood his 300th, silent, waiting. "You remember us," he said, "and that is enough. But tell the world, that courage dies when memory does." When Helena awoke, the helmet was gone. The next morning, her colleagues found her tent undisturbed, her notes untouched, but her footprints led from the camp toward the sea, stopping abruptly at the shoreline. The waves lapped gently where she had vanished, and for a moment, they said, they heard the faint clash of shields beneath the water. After that night, no birds flew over Thermopylae. In the years that followed, a strange phenomenon plagued the region. Electronic devices failed near the monument. Compasses spun. Soldiers training in nearby barracks reported dreams of a king in crimson armor demanding they stand their ground. A few woke screaming, hands clutching at phantom spears. A priest brought from Athens attempted an exorcism. During the rite, his crucifix melted in his hands. He fell to his knees, trembling, whispering only, "It's not evil, it's ancient." The haunting spread, not like a contagion, but like a remembrance awakening in the collective mind. People across Greece began dreaming of battles they had never fought, of shields glinting beneath blood-red skies. Tourists fainted near Leonidas's tomb, claiming to hear voices calling them brothers. Historians began to doubt whether the boundary between past and present had ever been real at all. One night, decades later, a filmmaker named Aris Petropoulos visited Thermopylae with a drone to capture footage for a documentary titled The Ghosts of Sparta. The drone's camera captured something no one could explain: a column of mist in the shape of men marching through the pass. At their head was a towering figure with a burning gaze. When the drone spotlight hit it, the image vanished, but the sound remained. A whisper, a breath of eternity. "We are watching." The footage went viral, of course. Some called it fake. Others believed the government sealed off the area soon after, citing unstable terrain. But every year, on the anniversary of the Battle of Thermopylae, the sky above the pass glows faintly red. Locals say it's just dust. Scientists say it's a quirk of the atmosphere. Yet, on those nights, if you stand in silence and listen closely, you can hear it. The rhythm of 100 spears striking the earth in unison. A chant carried by the wind, deep, mournful, proud. We held the line. And somewhere in the shadows of the mountains, a figure still walks, wearing a crimson cloak that flutters without breeze, carrying a spear that never dulls. His eyes burn with memory, and his face is both ancient and ageless. He does not seek rest. He does not seek peace. He seeks remembrance. They call him the Ghost of King Leonidas, Sparta's haunted warrior. And if you ever walk the battlefield alone, beneath the trembling moon, and feel the earth quake softly beneath your feet, know that it is not the wind you hear. It is the dead, still standing.